There are loads of World War II shooters out there, but very few that actually tried to do something different. The Brothers in Arms series wasn't about being a one-man army, it wasn't about kill streaks or spectacle. It was about squad tactics, realism, emotional storytelling, and showing war from a far grounded and personal perspective. Recently, I played through all three main games, Road to Hill 30, Earned in Blood, and Hell's Highway. And in this video I want to go through each one separately, the story, the gameplay, what holds up, what doesn't, and whether these games are still worth playing even today. I remember playing these games when they first came out and thoroughly enjoying them, and one of the main things I wanted to find out was if these games were genuinely good or if nostalgia was making me think they were way better than they were. It's worth noting there were also multiple Brothers in Arms games released on mobile back in the day, but I've decided not to play these for a number of reasons. Number one, because they're probably very hard / impossible to play today, and two, personally, I don't see them as actual Brothers in Arms games, and they're games that I didn't play back then, and like I say, I don't plan on playing now. So let's take a look at the first game. For anyone that's never played Brothers in Arms games before, the first one is called Road to Hill 30 and was released back in 2005, published by Ubisoft and developed by Gearbox, the same studio that would later go on to make Borderlands. Road to Hill 30 follows Staff Sergeant Matt Baker of the 101st Airborne Division, parachuting into Normandy during the D-Day invasion, but unlike most shooters, this isn't about being a run-and-gun super soldier. Almost immediately, things go wrong. Your squad gets scattered, soldiers die, confusion sets in, and the story becomes more about survival, leadership, and the psychological weight of command. The structure and tone of these games are extremely reminiscent of one of the best TV series ever made, Band of Brothers. You even get the same historical text before missions, very similar to the HBO series. The music, the themes, the pacing, it all feels inspiring by the same grounded, emotional take on World War II, of actually following a set of specific soldiers through the war. Gearbox actually worked with military historians and used real-life action reports from the 101st Airborne to build missions. So while the characters are fictional, the battles and locations are largely based on real events. The story itself is surprisingly serious for 2005. Baker struggles with guilt, doubt and responsibility, watching people under his command die because of the decisions he made. It's not subtle, but it's very ambitious for its time. Road to Hill 30 features 20 main gameplay chapters, starting with the Normandy invasion and leading up to the push into Carentan, with each chapter representing a distinct mission or phase of battle. In concept, the gameplay was actually brilliant when it was first released. Instead of run and gun, you're meant to suppress enemies with one squad, then flank with the other, use cover properly and think tactically with where you want to move. And when it works, it really works. But unfortunately, for me, the execution just hasn't aged well. The gunplay is pretty rough, ADS feels clunky, there's heavy bloom which means bullets just often don't go to where you're aiming. Which I get, it's meant to be more of a realistic shooter, but even point blank you'll still struggle to gun down an enemy. Enemies and mounted MGs are basically impossible to kill unless you run all the way around the back of them, which makes firefights feel more frustrating than tactical. I don't mind flanking a heavy bunkered MG, but when it's just one guy in a window, I should be able to snipe him off the gun. The pushing to Carentan section is especially brutal, and in my case it was literally game breaking. Due to a glitch where the AI couldn't walk over a section of pavement, this meant that when the mission finished, the AI that was meant to meet up with me was stuck outside. I was literally trying everything I could for around 20 minutes to push them past this point, but I just couldn't get them over the pavement, and in the end, it made me rage quit and just uninstall the game. Tanks are also meant to be this terrifying machine in war, but you can just literally go and jog up behind them and press F to destroy them. It just completely breaks the immersion. There are the occasional moments where the camera goes into third person, such as entering an in-place machine gun or going to throw a grenade down the hatch of a tank. And looking back, it feels like Gearbox are probably experimenting with ideas of properly implementing this into their third game. The healing mechanic for this game is, well, there isn't one, which in a way I kind of like. It makes it more challenging and realistic. Instead of having to find the odd med pack lying around, you're having to deal with the consequences of taking heavy damage early on and having to see out the game with 1 HP. There's also the usual old game mechanic of not having adjustable FOV, which it can be fine. However, it feels like in this game it's set to around 50, which is just super zoomed in. There can also be issues with AI where you are in charge of them, with sometimes them not taking cover and just not taking the route you would expect them to, making them get gunned down in the middle of the open. And right at the start of the game, it mentions how they are smart AI, where they'll not just stand in the middle of the open, they'll look for cover and not stay out in the middle of the open, which it just kind of goes against that when you're seeing them just, out there. And also, looking back on it, visually, this just hasn't aged well. Even by 2005 standards, you could argue that Call of Duty 2, which came out at the same time, looked a lot better and felt better to play. It's not necessarily a fair comparison because COD 2 was a pure action and this is more tactical, but still, visually, WWII 30 is rough today. Anyone who struggles with playing older games with bad graphics are going to struggle to go back to play this one. Voice acting is also sadly a little inconsistent. Some lines land well and others are incredibly cheesy, especially the escort mission involving the lieutenant where you've got to protect him for a while. It almost feels unintentionally comical, and I'll just play the clip here so you can see. It's just, very, very weird.
We've got to get back to that farmhouse. The only way is up that road, and I saw Germans in that orchard. We have to clear them out on the way back.
That being said, some things are pretty decent in this game. The weapons themselves still look okay, the models are decent, animations are serviceable, and you can see the ambition behind everything. If you go back to something like COD though, there were some times where if you looked in the background of what was happening in the scene, in the chapter that you were playing, you'd see things going on, like fights or tanks going off. And in this game, it just feels a bit empty. There's nothing happening outside of your battle. There's no little bits going on, planes flying over, dogfighting or anything like that. It's just slightly soulless when you're playing it. There was also an interesting take on a multiplayer mode that was released with this game, but it's basically dead now. I believe there is some mods that still allow you to play it, but ultimately if you're wanting to load up and try it out, it's not going to be possible anymore. Now look, my verdict on this first game: as a historical piece, fascinating. An ambitious narrative shooter, important. Or something to play today. It could be a rough one for most, but ultimately I think it's worth it, as it was groundbreaking at the time, and you need to play it if you plan on playing the others just to understand the soldiers' stories and get to grips with what's going on there. There's a great game buried in here, but the mechanics and technical limitations hold it back in 2026. It's also on the short side of things, with it only taking around 8 hours to complete. But look, back in the day, I absolutely loved this game. Coming back to it now, granted, I think I'm a bit naive in thinking that it was going to be any good. So that brings us on to the second game, which is Earned in Blood, released only 5 months later, which is insane by modern standards, but almost back then, it was the norm. I've actually never played this game before, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. This time, you're playing as Joe Red Hartsock, who was one of Baker's squad mates in the first game. So instead of retelling the same story, you're seeing the campaign from another perspective, and eventually following on from where the first game left off. That alone is a really cool idea. You revisit events from Road to Hill 30, but with new context, new emotions and different experiences. There are also actual cutscenes this time, which helps the story feel more cohesive. It's still grounded, still serious, still about leadership and loss, but it's better presented. Now unfortunately, from a gameplay perspective, it's almost the exact same game, which is kind of expected due to how quickly the turnaround was. The graphics are pretty much identical, which again makes sense because of the short development time. The gunplay unfortunately still feels pretty bad, ADS still isn't great, and the AI still does strange things despite the game claiming again that they're intelligent right at the start of the game. But look, there are improvements though. Missions feel longer and more substantial, with there being around 30 missions to complete. However, most will probably get this done in around 10 hours, so not actually that much longer than the original game. There are a few new weapons, which is nice again, but the gunplay is fairly poor. They all feel very similar, apart from the BAR, which is actually probably the best gun in the game in my opinion. You get a new tank unit, a tank destroyer, although vehicles in general still feel underpowered. Due to the amount of anti-tank guns everywhere on these missions, most of the time you're having to just leave them at the back of the combat in fear that they will just get pummeled by the AT guns. Again, tanks are meant to be this badass machine, as it feels like they're just underutilized in this game. One feature I actually really liked is that when squad mates die during missions, which could happen in the previous game, this time you can choose to not resurrect them after the mission's finished. This adds a surprising emotional weight and reinforces the idea that these are real people under your command. It would be nice if not rezzing them affected how the story went, but I think that might be too much to ask for back then. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this game, because like I said, it realistically is not much of a jump from the first game. So, my verdict on it is that it probably is in the long run slightly better than Road to Hill 30. The story is stronger and the missions are better, despite the fact that it probably takes around the same time to complete. There's just a bit more variety there, and it just feels, like you're actually completing an actual mission instead of tiny little portions of a mission. And some moments are genuinely challenging in these missions. There's some pretty hard ones in there. But mechanically, it still suffers from all the same issues. Worth playing if you care about the narrative, but don't expect a huge leap forward here. It feels more like an expansion pack for the game, rather than a true sequel. So, moving on to the final game in the series, Hell's Highway. And this is where the series finally feels like it becomes what it was always meant to be, and what most people, including myself, would argue this is by far the best game in the series. I remember playing this for the first time and genuinely being amazed at it. So this game was released back in 2008, which is the same year Call of Duty released World at War, and I would argue in some instances, this game does look slightly better. However, a different game came out that year, which was GTA 4, which was probably one of the best looking games that year, and I don't think it looks quite as good as that. Now, the story, Hell's Highway, is set during Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands, and you're back playing as Matt Baker from the first game. Right away, the game opens with a cinematic recap of the earlier games, recreated with the new engine, and it genuinely is a great moment. It's cool to see how the previous games could have looked with a remaster in this newer engine. The story as well here is probably the strongest in the trilogy, in my opinion. It shows you Baker, who's clearly struggling mentally, the weight of command and trauma and guilt. It's all finally tied together in a way that feels cohesive. It even managed some slight horror vibes to it, with flashbacks and hallucinations of Baker, with him visualising dead colleagues and teammates. A real nice section in this game for me was the encounters with Colonel Sink, which again really enforces that Band of Brothers vibe. The story overall, again, like I say, it's probably the best in the series, and it just ties all of the games together. Now, taking a look at the graphics of the game, the jump in visuals here is massive. Compared to the first two games, Hell's Highway looks incredible. And honestly, in most areas, I would argue it still holds up today. You could play this and think, you know what, this probably only came out a few years ago. Not that it's almost 20 years old. There's some bit of lighting as well in some sections, which is absolutely phenomenal. Light streaming through windows, shadows across interiors. The colour palette as well in general just feels so much better and vibrant. Even on the first mission with the lovely green fields, it's genuinely impressive. Some scenes still look beautiful today, even by modern standards. Not every 2008 game has aged gracefully, but honestly, I think this one has. There's also been massive improvements with the combat, where they've finally got it to feel like a proper shooter for once. You can actually hit enemies behind cover properly, like when you can see their little head popping up, you can actually hit that now instead of just hitting some invisible wall. You can destroy some cover like tables as well, which again adds another element of that tactical approach. You can position your squad more intelligently, and they seem to be a lot more smarter in terms of taking cover, and you can also sneak into better flanking positions, whereas before the AI would just open fire on you, or your AI would open fire on them immediately. They now wait for your command, and you can get some good flanks on them to make a real tactical approach to a fighting situation. And like I just mentioned, the squad management is miles better. AI, look, it's still not perfect, but it's a huge step up. It's also nice to have another squad induced, the MG squad, which can lay down some devastating cover and fire. There's also the introduction of the third-person cover mechanic, which is honestly a fantastic addition, and I truly believe there's moments where the game feels better in third person than first. I actually think if this game was completely third person, it would have done even better than it had before. Although it's nice to see the guns close up and you've got that nice animation detail on them now and visual looks of like a Tommy gun, for example, having it in third person with how the graphics looked, it honestly would have been the icing on the cake for me. But look, it's not all positive. The ADS is absolutely horrific. You have this sway and it's just absolutely insane. Even when you're standing still, the screen bounces around like you're on a boat. It makes it almost impossible to fight anything using ADS. I found myself just shooting from the hip, even targets where I would normally ADS, just because it's so bad. I guess it's supposed to be on that realistic side, but it just feels way too much to be even realistic. It's just unmanageable, especially when you slightly move to the left or right, it immediately activates that sway again. And looking down a sniper scope, it's even worse. So I don't know what they were thinking when they came to that. There's also a couple of sections where you have to climb staircases, and again, I'm not sure if it's maybe an FPS issue with it being such an old game, but there's a section where, for example, you have to climb these windmill staircases in the first mission, and it genuinely is nausea-inducing. You bounce absolutely everywhere. This game also introduces the ability to sprint for the first time. However, you feel more like you have little control over this, and you just have to sprint in the direction you're looking. Speaking of the sprinting mechanic, keybinds are also a little bizarre. Vault and sprint on the same button? I mean, who thought that was a good idea? There's also the addition of tank missions, where this time you actually drive and command the tank from a third-person perspective, rather than just ordering it round like a squad member. These missions are a cool new addition, but the tank feels weightless. And on PC, there's even a bug where it literally wheelies whilst driving. This is probably again due to frame rate issues being so high, but it means you are constantly having to stop so you can bring the cannon down to shoot anything. These missions also feel very easy with little challenging resistance. It would be nice to see more tank versus tank combat or sections where you need to find another way around to flank the enemy. It's also worth noting the healing system, which is very strange. You don't take any real damage, your screen just turns red and then you die if you don't reach cover fast enough. It's a strange decision to take, and I'd almost prefer it with just either some normal regen ability where you can tell you're being hit with a bullet where you'll get some screen shake or something, or they just go back to the original style of no heals, or in fact could they even bring in a medic squad that would heal you. Yeah, a strange way where they went with this. One of the nice things to see though is that there's a lot more going off in the distance of this game. Something that was missing from the last ones, sections where tanks are rolling into cities or planes flying overhead. Again, it gives the character of this game more and it gives more of a soul to the game. I mentioned before how the other ones felt empty. This one feels more like you are in a war zone. One of the things I was disappointed to see was the mechanic of not rezzing your squad, which has disappeared. Instead of them dying, they now just get injured and stay on the ground, but then within the next checkpoint, they're normally back on their feet and rejoin the squad. It doesn't really give you that sense that this is a tactical shooter that if you lose someone, it's really going to be detrimental to the mission. Instead, it's just, if you lose someone, they'll be back in a couple of minutes, so what's the issue? There's also some massive improvements for weapon sounds. Everything feels punchier, heavier, more realistic. The weapon sounds a lot more like they do in real life. Voice acting, again, is still cheesy in some sections, but honestly, at this point, it kind of feels a bit of a part of the series. Some cutscenes do go a bit hard on the shaky camera, but you understand what they're trying to do. Convey chaos, confusion, stress, so you can kind of see how, see past this. Speaking of cutscenes, there is another part where a lot of work has been done, and they look visually very, very good. The only probably thing I really hate about the cutscenes is that the few times you have some privates on Baker's company questioning and arguing with his decisions and overall not treating him like a sergeant, which just feels a bit weird considering he's been the lead of this unit for so long now, and it's almost something that you imagined he wouldn't put up with. Look, overall, this game is still fantastic and well worth playing today, especially for anyone who loves a World War II shooter. For me, it's still the best in the series by a mile, and although again it's still only around 8 to 10 hours of completion time, so still relatively short. However, again, for some reason or another, the missions themselves just don't feel that way. They still feel like they've got some good length to them. So having played all 3 games, I had a look at the reviews on Steam and all 3 were down as very positive. And honestly, I get it. Nostalgia definitely plays a role here, but there's genuinely quality here. Road to Hill 30 was ambitious, important, but has aged badly. Earned in Blood, better narrative, but still limited mechanically. Hell's Highway is genuinely excellent and is definitely worth playing today. If Gearbox were ever to revive this series with the modern technology, modern AI and modern designs of today, it would be absolutely incredible. I mean, Hell's Highway generally says to be continued at the end of the game, with huge hints of a Battle of the Bulge game being the next in the series, and makes the fact that we never got a fourth game even more painful. It's a real shame the series has never had a fourth. There's so much potential here. Gearbox's CEO Randy Pitchford affirmed that the company is working on a new Brothers in Arms game back in September 2021, but no other news has since been released, which makes you wonder if it's been cancelled. There was even talk of a TV adaptation of the show around 2020, but again, news on this has just quietly disappeared, and it's all a shame because this series still has massive potential, and if they could iron out the little issues that were in Hell's Highway, a new game could genuinely be one of the best World War shooters we've ever had. Now, if you played these games back in the day, I'd love to know which one was your favourite, and if you're new to the series but only want to pick up one of the games, Hell's Highway is absolutely the one I'd recommend to go with. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe for more gaming review content, and I'll see you in the next one.